Okay, let's do one more. Mm-hmm.
In the
We have a
sales,
celebrity photographer.
thank you. In the sales success book, you talk quite a bit about positioning yourself. And in this new economy, this new marketing, what further steps can you take to really position yourself so far up? You know, it ties into what you're talking about just a little bit ago, so that people are practically begging for your
Yeah.
services.
Well, if you stop to think about it, so if you think for a second about a few minutes ago, I talked about sort of the new economy customer, right? And they have a hangover from the recession, and that now they want to be perceived as more thoughtful and prudent and responsible in their spending, which now means more thoughtful, prudent, and responsible in their selection of who they spend with and what they purchase, right? So that makes positioning all the more important, the premise of your question, than it ever was before, right? Because if they're going to be more selective, then how they judge us, how they perceive us, what they are able to deduce about us before they choose to do business with us, before they choose to give us money, is pretty important. So to back up for a second, the first premise talked about in the book is positioning instead of prospecting. So most salespeople think in terms of traditional prospecting, which is like, it's the sales equivalent of taking the giant club, leaving the cave in the morning, finding prey, smacking it over the head, and dragging it back to the cave, right? And a large percentage of the sales profession, it still operates that way. I just turned down an invitation to be on a video documentary because although it would be good exposure in an industry, I'd like to do it, and I personally like the people. But their whole premise, they're still teaching the idea that persistence is an unmitigated virtue, and that the answer to every sales professional's success is get more no's. And so if you get more no's, you'll ultimately get more yeses, which is, of course, technically true, but it's a cavemanish, primitive way to get to the yes, you know. And so their premise is essentially change the way you feel about that ugly, miserable existence, rather than fix the ugly, miserable parts of the existence. So we're not really compatible. So the first thing is positioning, not prospecting. So, you know, my advice to salespeople always is you shouldn't be prospecting, because the positioning is wrong. And the more you want to be perceived as something other than a salesman, which is like as far down on the economic pyramid pretty much as you can go, the more you want to be perceived as an expert, as a specialist, as a trusted advisor, whatever. And I don't care if that's the guy who owns the place where you board the dog, or that's the photographer, or the financial services professional. Doesn't make any difference. So the more you want to be perceived as that expert, trusted advisor, celebrity, elite and exclusive person who can only take a few, and the less you want to be perceived as a salesman, then what that tells you is you can't engage in any of the behavior that salespeople engage in, because it immediately marks you as that, right? And you want to engage in as much of the behavior, right? So the other night, this is in fact just the other night, somebody is telling me about his brother and his brother's really considerable health problems. And I suggested that he might want to speak to my doctor, and I'd be happy to refer him. The first question he asked was, how long will we have to wait before we can get in to see him? Okay? Now, that's a common, normal, customary question about a highly recommended doctor, particularly a specialist, right? If we had been having the same conversation about, say, aluminum siding for our house, he would not have asked, how long will it be before we can get to talk to the aluminum siding salesperson, right? That would not be a normal, customary, instinctive question. But we want that question asked about us, right? Because we want to be that doc. We don't want to be that normal aluminum siding salesperson. No disrespect, by the way, to the aluminum siding industry. Hey, I'm selling books, you know. But so none of our behavior can mark us as just another salesperson. So if we weren't sure about what to do, we could start out by knowing what not to do, right? Then the second thing, which goes back to directly to your question, is the positioning is more and more important. And with a new economy customer, it's going to be critically important because they are trying to be more thoughtful and more prudent and responsible and be perceived as more thoughtful and prudent and responsible. That really means, in part, that they also want, more so than ever, bragging rights from the persons, the companies they choose to buy from, because they want to be perceived as being more thoughtful, prudent, and responsible. So positioning now is critically important. So positioning is really about knowns. What do you want known about you? How do you want to be known? What 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things do we want our prospects to know about us? Do we want our clients to say when they tell others the story about us, right? So like I made a conscious decision quite some time ago that one of the things in my business as a direct response copywriter, or freelance copywriter, one of the things I want known about me is that I am extremely expensive. Not once you factor in results, but, you know. So I want, if Ron is going to tell John about me, I want one of the 5 things for Ron to be sure to tell John. I want him to tell him, and you better brace yourself for the fees. Okay? You be sitting down when he tells you. Okay? I want that happening. Right? That's part of my positioning. I say I'm the highest priced, highest fee, direct response. Why do I do that? Because I want only to be selling to the right person. Right? I don't want to waste my time selling to the wrong people, and because there's a segment of the marketplace who, of course, wants the best. They equate best with priciest, right? And so that's a conscious choice on my part. So positioning is about making conscious choices about what you want to be known about you that serves you best, and then doing everything you can to make it known and make sure that when your story is told for you by others, that that's the story that is told, right? And so when you think about positioning is really an advertising word, but when you move it over into selling, you think about it as personal positioning. And so you've got to come up with this little short list of the 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 things that are going to be your consistent message about who you are, where you are on the food chain, sort of, who your clients are, who your type of clients are. We talked, it's in a newsletter a couple months ago, off camera, you and I talked about it at lunch, the $250,000 fee portrait for a photographer, right? And pretty much, I think, by anybody's measure, $250,000 for photography, for portraits is, yeah, it's a pretty good little chunk of change, right? And so a big part of his positioning is who his clientele is, right? Because that justifies you wanting to be one of that clientele. See, it's not so much about I'm the world's greatest photographer. It's not about that, okay? It's more about who chooses to have me as their photographer because you want to be like them too, right? So that's the whole thing about positioning.